right. Welcome to our latest Meet the Author event. I'm David Lui with the Chinese American Museum in DC. We're the only museum in our nation's capital dedicated to the Chinese American story, the history, culture, and voices of Chinese in America. Today, we're talking about how to find meaning and compassion in even the smallest and everyday choices through selflessness. Today's discussion features two people that have found ways to realize positives in the depths of their own personal challenges, specifically the care of parents with Alzheimer's. Richard Lui is a journalist and news anchor for MSNBC and NBC News, and formerly CNN, where he became the first Asian American male to anchor a daily national cable news show. His new book, which releases March 23rd, Enough About Me, The Unexpected Power of Selflessness, is the topic of our talk today. And we are joined by J. Newton Small. She's the CEO and founder of MemoryWell, a national network of more than 700 writers who tell the life stories of seniors to help improve their care. Jay is also a former correspondent for and still a contributor to Time Magazine, and has written nearly a dozen Time cover stories and interviewed numerous heads of state, including President Obama and George W. Bush. She authored the 2016 best-selling book, Broad Influence: How Women Are Changing the Way America Works. So Richard and Jay, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you both here.
It's great to be here, David.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to learning more about your latest projects.
Great to be here, although I don't seem to be able to turn on my video.
Oh.
It says you can't start it because the host has stopped it.
Uh-oh. Okay, I apologize.
Not a problem, right? That happens all the time.
The wonders of technology.
You don't need to see me anyway. You want to see Richard.
No, they want to see you, Jay. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay. Okay, there you are. Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. So I'm really honored to be here, with the Chinese American Museum of DC, which is just down the street from where I live, but also more importantly to be able to chat with my friend and dear friend Richard Lui about his amazing new book, which I am so excited to read. I've pre-ordered it on Amazon. It comes out at the end of the month, I believe, Richard, in March 23rd. Mm-hmm. March 23rd. There we go. And I've read, but I've also already seen the sort of movie that inspired partly the book, but even more so, I've known Richard for years and heard his story in caregiving for his father, have seen him fly back and forth almost weekly to San Francisco from New York to help caregive for his father. And I've known this story and watched it with just so much compassion and love, just to see how much Richard values his family, and also how important it is to him to just be there for his elders. That it's just amazing to me to now have this book, to be able to talk about this experience that really changed Richard enormously. And so I just want to start with a question, and it's an interesting, the theme is selflessness, right? So the title of the book is Enough About Me, The Unexpected Power of Selflessness. And I know, being dementia and Alzheimer's caregiver for my father, you just constantly feel guilty, right? Like that you're never doing enough for them, that there's always more that could be done, that somehow it's not satisfactory. And I really struggled with that guilt. But Richard, it seems like you really transformed that guilt into something that was powerful and empowering. And I'd love for you to just talk about that.
Jay, thanks for leaning in and taking the time to have this conversation, because I know that for all of us, when we have another event or another gathering, we now value it a little bit more, right? Because when this situation first started, we wanted to see people. Now I know that you decided to put a little box on your calendar. So thanks for that, Jay. And yeah, Jay and I know each other going back to actually talking about caregiving. We were at a TEDx event in DC, and we had known of each other. And I just said, hey, Jay, I just want to say hello. And, I've seen you on our air. And then we'd interviewed each other. We'd interviewed and been on TV many times. And so I didn't know that about your background. You didn't know that about my background. And I think, to answer your question, that's so typical of not only folks that happen to be of Asian descent, but people in general who are caregiving. Now, there's certainly an element that's attached to being of Asian descent, of being Chinese and being a caregiver. That's for sure. But I think it was a long journey, to answer your question. And I'm still on it. And I still don't know the answers to a lot of the questions that are posed to us as caregivers. And the bigger question, which the book is about being selfless. And I still don't know the answers. But I felt that 8 years ago, when it started, where I was flying to California for 300,000 to 500,000 miles a year, that was a lot. And I was getting a little tired. You can tell I'm like, my brain's like, wow, that was a lot.
I mean, so I want to just drill down a little bit about the idea of Asians and caregiving, because I do feel like, certainly for me, and I know for you, respect for elders is really instilled in me at a young age, the idea that it was obviously going to be a responsibility to care for my parents when I got older myself. There just wasn't even a question. It was not even like a conversation that we had. It was just sort of an unspoken assumption, I think, that you just grew up with, right? And so, but I, having worked now with MemoryWell, with so many senior living communities, so many agencies that work with aging, there's a big difference, I think, culturally with Americans in that sense. And America, I think, tends to really discount older people. And there's a lot of ageism. There's a lot of sort of, oh, they're not worth anything anymore. They're just like, sort of just go send them to the home and to the farm to retire, and that's it. And I just want to sort of drill down a little bit about like this cultural disconnect and how, particularly in the era of COVID, this importance of honoring seniors, this importance of taking care of seniors, and how can we better, I don't know, educate Americans or better sort of understand why there's this disconnect in America and address it?
Yeah, when it comes to being Asian, Jay, I don't know. Well, I kind of have an inkling. I'm guessing that when you were growing up, you're like, yeah, I'm Asian, but sometimes I'm not. And the values I have are Asian or Chinese, and they're not at the same time. And, when it came to decide to ask my boss to work part-time, because that's what happened is 7 years ago, I decided to ask my boss to work part-time. And, in our business of journalism, it's 8 days a week, 25 hours a day. And you don't go in and ask to work part-time. And especially if you put on the stereotype of what we might be as, again, people of Asian descent, that just doesn't fit. I mean, it's the round peg in the square hole. But for some reason, it felt, I guess, easier than easy is the wrong word. I think I moved to ask that question of my boss faster, that when I reflect on it now, than I would have thought otherwise, because the business, peer-to-peer here is you work hard to get those titles. You work hard to get those positions. And I was, in retrospect, surprised how I moved that way. But I guess the other side of the argument, Jay, is that, my dad grew up with he's one of 13 siblings, and they grew up poor in Chinatown, San Francisco, and they love each other, all the siblings, and they will do anything for each other. And that sense of family, which I had all the way, going to the Christmas and the Lunar New Year and all those other events, and you had 90, 100 people in the room. And I'm like, I would have to actually ask my mom, who are the new ones? I don't know who they are. Who are the new ones in the family? And that's that sense, right, Jay? Gives you the sense of, it's sort of a muscle. You just know, you just do it. I never thought about it. You know what I mean?
Well, but I have heard you talk about and seen you quoted say that, you knew that the longer this went on, caregiving for your father, that it was hurting your career. And yet the book is about selflessness. And so the question is like, did you ever feel that tension of the selfishness of like, oh my gosh, my career is really being damaged now. This is going to be painful for me. And yet like, there's no question I have to sacrifice for this. I have to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, I still do it now. Like I midway through, the story that I remember that stands out of one of those where, you sit there going, am I doing the right thing? Because even after I got the part-time, and they were very kind to do that, standing on the subway platform at 3 a.m. in the morning, 2 or 3 times a month, and, waiting for that subway to arrive, that train to arrive, and then take the hour-and-a-half journey to get out to JFK, then flying all the way to San Francisco, and, sitting in row 42 because I could lay down flat, maybe get a couple of, because nobody was there. And I was just trying to save enough energy and enough money so that I could keep on doing this. But when you stand there after doing it so many times on that platform, and you just go, I don't know.
And I mean, and our news business has changed so much in the last decade, right? So a decade ago, you could have gone part-time and missed news cycles and it was fine. But now everything moves in like Twitter speed, right? So you take an hour and a half off, or 3 hours or 5 hours for a plane ride, and like, 15 news cycles have passed, or 150 news cycles have passed. And so did you ever feel that tension of like that stress of, oh, I'm missing these things, I'm missing news, which I know I'd certainly felt, when I first
FOMO?
started MemoryWell. Go ahead.
Professional FOMO?
Yes, exactly. No, I could cover this better. I know I would be able to interview this person, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I even today I have it. But at that time I did, but I didn't, I guess maybe because of the flexibility. And it also seemed, because there was so much, the competitive nature of the business now means, like you're saying, the cycle moves very quickly. So that means that consumers also expect that, right? Because the product's being provided that way. And in terms of missing the big stories, look, you're in DC and you're covering all the heavy political stories, which have driven our news cycle for a better part of a decade in big ways. And so 7 or 8 years ago, and then 6 years ago, when things really started to get reduced for me, I did have a little bit of FOMO, but in general, I was kind of okay with it. I miss a couple. In other words, it wasn't like FOMO level 10. It was FOMO level 3.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
Like there definitely in the last 4 years, I think there's been fewer and fewer stories that I feel like I've not missed so much, I have to say. Maybe the protests in Hong Kong, I kind of wish I'd covered those. Those looked like fun, but
yeah. Well, that's true. That's a good point. Sorry to interrupt you, Jay. Is that the international part of my career I did miss, because that was almost impossible. Those were like, no, can't do that. No, I can't go there. The domestic, I could still somehow fit in between. When I'm flying from one coast to another, I could stop off if I needed to do something. So yeah, and I did do that. Like I'd stop off in Ferguson and then I'd head off to California.
Wow. So tell me about Sky Blossoms and how you first got interested in this issue of military caregiving. Was it related to your caregiving to your father? And tell me about how the movie evolved.
So like 4 years ago, and this happened with you in MemoryWell. I mean, caring for a loved one changes you, and it keeps on changing you. It tears you down, literally, emotionally and physically, and it builds you back up, and then it happens again. I'm going through it right now again, as I think of different state. We can get into that later. But at the time, I was speaking on caregiving. I became a caregiving ambassador. I didn't know there were such things, a caregiving champion. And you're one as well. You understand that. You didn't know that they existed, but you're glad they do, right?
No, for sure. And I do have to say that so many people are embarrassed about their caregiving stories. They don't want to
Yeah.
talk about them. They think it's somehow shameful to, like, talk about the suffering of
Yep.
their loved one or whatever it is. But it isn't until we feel comfortable openly talking about this issue that we're going to get the resources I think we need. I think it's just this massive hidden secret in the United States that people don't realize how hard it is often, especially Alzheimer's and dementia, but really any kind of caregiving is just enormous. And I think I was shocked to learn the statistics when I became, as you said, a caregiving ambassador, and how many people are going through this. At any given time, I think there's something like 42 million, caregivers in the United States who are caring for an adult loved one, and that's a lot of people, and it's only going to get bigger and bigger as the baby boomer generation ages into this. And so, if we don't sort of speak up and say, "Hey, there's not enough long-term care in the United States. There's not enough, help here," I think it's going to become a crisis, right?
It is. And just a note of depending who you talk to, those numbers are different, right? Like the 40 million, some say it's 53 million, some say it's close to 100 million.
Wow.
Bottom line is taking care of somebody else in the family with no training, other than passion training, if you will, or heart training.
Mhm.
Other than there's no technical training, there's no pay, and there's so many of them. There are more people doing family caregiving than any other job in the world.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, it is the most common job in the world, taking care of a loved one who has an ailment. But we don't acknowledge it in the culture at all. And especially depending on certain cultures that you might be talking about,
Mhm.
you don't see identifiable characters doing that. So an example is like in the Asian American community or the Chinese American community is you don't talk about that stuff. So one of my sort of eye-opening experiences when I did a video with AARP and Daphne Kwok, where she said, let's do a video that, I know you know her well. She said, let's do a video of you caring for your father. I was like, why? Okay, we'll do it, but why? And she said, because, people need to be able to see this.
Mhm.
And sure enough, showing it to certain communities rather than telling them is much easier. You can imagine you sit down next to your parents and you start talking to them. We got to start planning for caregiving, taking care of you when you're not so well. And they're going to be like, what are you talking about? It's just, but if you turn on a video and you just watch the video and you see other Asian folks going through it,
Mhm.
somehow that's a better communication because somebody else is going through it. And we're not talking like this. And it could be in language as well. It could be appropriate, culturally appropriate.
For sure. I don't know about you, but every time I talk about my caregiving experience in front of audiences, I have people come up to me afterwards and they're like almost furtive about it. They're sort of like, well, I had a similar experience. And I'm like, you should talk about it. I always try to encourage people to like talk openly about it, not just with people like you or me, people who've gone through the same thing, but with strangers, with their members of Congress, especially with with caregiving groups. I mean, there's just so many people and resources out there I don't think people realize exist and could really help them. And so I think at the end of this, we're going to share a group of resources that we hope that if anybody is a family caregiver on this call today, will be a resource to you and that you will avail yourselves of them, because too often people try too hard to do it themselves. And I'd love for you to talk about your parents' experience and your caregiving for your father and the effect on your mom, and she had a lot of support from you and your brothers, but often it's the primary caregiver that is the most affected. It's the hardest for them. And the ones that we really have to worry about. My mother cared for my father for 10 years. And like 40% of Alzheimer's and dementia caregivers, she died of the stress of caregiving. And so she had a stress-induced brain aneurysm in 2011 and died at the age of 59. And it's, I think, my deepest regret that I didn't realize, she was in the process of moving to DC so I could help out more, but I didn't realize how dire the situation was until it was far, far too late. And so, yeah, I would love to just hear about your experience with your father and your mom now as well.
Jay, every time I hear your story of your mom giving so much of herself, you're like, well, don't we need people that are so giving? And the flip side, you're like, no, we don't need people giving that much, right? And I write about it in the book of Unmitigated Selflessness. That's what your mom, she reached that level of, she didn't even know that she was hurting. She didn't know that she was giving up everything. Even if she did, she wouldn't stop. There was no way that she would not care for your father. And because of DNA, because of upbringing, because of values. And the bottom line is, yeah, there is a situation where it's too much. Mm-hmm. There is a situation where you can give too much of yourself, and you do want to be careful. My mother also went through that. I'm watching her right now, actually, because she recently fell 2 weeks ago. So we're taking shifts where we monitor her either in person or remotely. I am watching her right below you at the moment. And I was watching her one time before, but not her, but my father. And I heard her scream at him in a way, your family when they scream, right? And this scream I'd never heard. It was curdling. It was, I'm hurting. I need help. And I'm mad at not you. It's just, please help me, Stephen, her husband, my dad, anybody help me. She didn't know that I was listening. I told her later, I actually showed her the chapter in the book, and I said, Mom, is it okay if I share this with other people? That, you were basically saying this, and then we knew that it was time to consider moving him into a care facility, because even with all the help, and we're not wealthy enough to, have all the care that he would need in home. Otherwise we would. And that's always a tough decision. But when my mom said yes, reluctantly, I knew she had given her all. And then, Jay, it was, well, how much damage, if you will, did she suffer? And I didn't notice it until she pulled out her violin a year after my father had to be moved to a care facility. It was 2 years after. And she tried to play, and she couldn't remember the songs that she could play before. And she's played different instruments her entire life. She's 85 now. She started learning when she was 78. Fantastic musician, sung in the choir since she was this tall. Music is her thing, but it was gone. And then you got to see behind the curtain about what she had given of herself, like your mother, who had given and given and given. And I know we all we wish we could have changed it. Like I wish I could have changed it. I know you wish you could have changed it too. But we were giving our all, our the best that we could, and we can't go back, and we only can go forward. And just to finish the story, which I know I'm waxing poetic here a little bit, Jay, but I was watching her yesterday, and she was Tuesday, actually. That's her violin lesson day, and she sounded getting better. She was able to remember her song. She's getting back onto the horse, this after she fell, and my father. And as you know, being an expert in the space, because you go to every conference when it comes to caregiving, music therapy is so important. Yeah. So my little 5'2" mom, born in China, coming over here at 2, is now doing okay and able to break out her violin.
Amazing. That's so great to hear that she's like bounced back and is, recovered her sense of self and who she is. And because I think it's so hard. They get so wrapped up in the other and in the other person that they lose themselves, like, as you said. So that's amazing. I'm so glad to hear that. And you're caregiving for her though right now. You were saying you're watching her on video. She had a fall, and so it's you and your brothers, right, that sort of take turns caregiving for your dad back in the day when you were sort of taking shifts, and then also for your mom now, right?
That's right. And we're still working at it, and it's not necessarily perfect. Right now I'm airing a little family laundry, but we're not necessarily seeing eye to eye, and that happens. But we move forward to the best as we can, because when it comes down to what we're seeing in all of them is that they want to give of themselves in the best way that they can. And sometimes when you are getting closer to that unmitigated selflessness quotient, and by the way, in the book, there is a questionnaire to determine how close you are to getting to too far down the road of unmitigated selflessness. And it gives you a ranking. It also has a scoring to see how selfless you are. So if you're curious about, how do I score and how am I growing or how am I falling back? That's also in the book, because the book tries to be very practical about how you give of yourself.
Absolutely. And that's so important. In fact, we have a question from the audience, which I wanted to pose to you about that exact moment. It says, I want to hear how you got to the point of selflessness. When did you decide you, quote unquote, had to take care of your parent, and to talk more about the selflessness of it?
I got in first. And that was when I had a conversation with my dad's youngest sister. And she said, Stephen can't remember his siblings. Again, I said, they grew up in a small place in Chinatown. They were poor, one fish, a gallon of rice, that whole story with gravy, that was them. And if you can forget your siblings' names in that environment, that began we need to talk to the neurologist. Where does he rank 1 to 7 in the Alzheimer's progression scale, whatever scale you might use? Where was he going? I think when I realized that I was really questioning myself about being selfless, like that idea of being selfless, probably a year and a half ago.
Wow. So Sky Blossom was already out, and
well along.
Yes.
And I didn't equate the caregiving with selflessness, like that idea, but I did know that caregiving was important to do, and that everybody needed to value it in our country, and to see it, because we're losing, as many know, $500 billion every year in value of caregiving. But the journey of caregiving is similar to the journey of, I think, selflessness. I mean, when my agents approached me and said, Richard, there's something here, but caregiving is not necessarily a big, attractive sort of topic in books, but a big idea about being selfless is important. And being a reporter, I saw that we had already lived through, well, not already. We are living through several pandemics at the same time. Certainly a viral pandemic, where we see some folks deciding that even after our medical experts around the country, this is not about being political, this is about believing our medical experts, that we should wear a mask to protect our loved ones, our senior citizens, as well as every other, and we weren't. That was selfish. When we think of the racial pandemic, these acts of violence and hate against people because of their race, that is selfish. When I've covered way too many, and you've been there, when a producer says to you, Jay, hang on, Jay, we have a breaking news story. And most often that you've been doing that for the last 5 years is because there was somebody killing a lot of people. And that is the pinnacle of selfishness, that I think that my view and who I am, I can take somebody else's life. And that is the epitome of selfishness. And unfortunately, I feel like I can handle the breaking news story of a mass shooting anywhere or a terrorist attack anywhere in the world right now. I wish I didn't have that skill, to be honest. But I've covered so many of them. But you take all of that together, and we are living in, I believe, a selfish pandemic. We don't care about people. Hate and violence is cheap. And so that then brought in the idea that, yes, there needs to be something, as simple as it is to push for enough about me, and to realize that unexpected power of selflessness that is involved in just about every culture and about every religion, that says, yeah, that's valuable, and it can be done. And the one last thing is that the approach was not only the big idea, but to be very practical. So in the book, It's an instruction manual because I'm that way. I don't like things that aren't practical. So if you leaf through the book, I've got like all these charts, but I also have cartoons. I even have a poem. I was looking at this and I forgot that we wrote some poems in the back of the book that really can hopefully inspire you.
That's amazing. I cannot wait to read this book. I'm really excited about it. And I encourage everybody to pre-order it on Amazon. I think it's going to be an amazing, just not only read, but also just a resource, for, I think, people who so desperately need it these days. I do want to just touch back on what you were talking about, in this, and I apologize, my dog is barking, so I'm going to put in my headphones.
Oh, that's okay. I've got a thing called the sun.
This is like classic, Zoom era of Zoom when so hopefully that'll make it better. So I think it's really interesting in talking about selflessness because I wrote Times cover story on the Emmanuel 9. So the 9 people who were killed by a white supremacist, they're African-American in the basement of the Church of Mother Emanuel in Charleston. And the whole world was amazed that they forgave so quickly, right? And that they were so selfless. That was like a thing, Obama saying Amazing Grace at Clemente Pinckney's funeral. And that was, and to me, it was surprising in the sense that the shock is that they were selfless, right? That the surprise was that they were selfless, because in this era, it's much more common to be selfish and to blame people and to strike out in rage. And it's so rare that we see people say, no, even though I'm justified in doing that, I'm not going to strike out. I'm going to forgive. I'm going to move on. And
yes.
And I want to touch on some of the incidences of racism, of the quote unquote Chinese disease, the Chinese, pandemic, and attacks against Chinese right now, because I believe that's another example of people being selfish and people blaming when, in this case, it's, clearly not every Chinese American's fault that this happened and that the disease is not, So I would love for you to just talk a little bit about this. We talked about this before, but I'd love to hear, for you to share your thoughts with everybody.
What a big topic that is, Jay, and everybody on this. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Jay and I wish we could all have done this together. David, I know, too, would have loved that at the museum. Yeah. And so thank you for your questions as well, which Jay is going to take us through. And I think when we think about the Asian hate crimes that are happening right now, this goes back a long time of us being other Asians. Always other, that's one dynamic. Goes back to 1882, which is in the museum. Come on down and take a look at it, about the Chinese Exclusion Act. And, my 2 grandparents came to America illegally because of that act. And in fact, my real name is Wong, not Lui, because they bought the name. And I always like to say, well, I don't know, I always say that, I have the Wong name. And that is the reality of being Asian in America, is that you are seen as other. In terms of why we're seeing this today, which is the ultimate act, again, of selfishness, it's unfortunate that it's a collection of a perfect storm of elements. And I'll just say one thing, because I could go on and on and on about this, is that it's not one group against another. It's about an idea against another idea, a belief against a belief. And that's all I'll really go, because otherwise, that's a whole different panel, right? But it does reflect selfishness. The very act of, and I write in the San Francisco Chronicle on Monday about this, that it's the people that stand up that are selfless that do that. And there's all sorts of ways it manifests itself. The one idea that I'm clear to make in the book is that being selfless is not subtractive. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not 1 + 1 always equals 2. It doesn't mean that if you sacrifice, therefore there is less in your pocket, if you will. The argument I will make in the book is 1 + 1 = 3. And we spent a good amount of time, and I'm glad we did, all that time of me standing on the platform, getting in a plane and door to door, 10 hours, is 1 + 1 = 3. There is no way I would have done a film that highlights the importance of caregivers across America of all different ethnic backgrounds, of Black and Latino and Native and Asian and white. You know, I would have never done that. And that is what we don't know sometimes. And so the key point is selflessness. One idea here, 1 + 1 = 3. It doesn't feel like that all the way. And you know that, Jay, but it changed your life and your career too.
Well, so I'm going to read some of the comments to this, and two of them I think tie together around this point. One is from Paul Lee, and he says, the obsession of so-called rights is a sign of selflessness. Rights, quote unquote, should always be balanced with responsibilities, quote unquote, and the sense of individuals, quote unquote, should always be balanced with the sense of community, quote unquote. This is the area Asian culture can teach something to the Western pop culture. I stress pop culture because traditional Western culture wasn't like this either. And then we have another question that relates to that from Juliet Wer, who says, define selflessness and how does it fit in the Chinese Asian traditional culture?
Well, I am no expert in historic Chinese culture or Chinese American culture, but I will say that selflessness manifests itself individually for every family and your background. And the way I express it in the book is very much a Chinese American and Asian American and American experience of what has taught me to explore the idea. And what we try to say is that, for instance, because we are in this great country, for instance, we have many communities of other. That is our richness and our wealth. And so to be Chinese American in America means to acknowledge those communities of other, to work on systems that reflect that. That means many different things. It means the way we design public spaces, the way that we design libraries and the way people interact. It means the way we design new cities. It means the policies that we put together about who gets elected and how they get elected. France, for instance, not too long ago, in the last 3 decades, said all of each party's slate needs to be at least 50% women. And what happened? All of a sudden, you had the first mayor of Paris who was female. And all of a sudden, you had leaders move up into the ranks. So I don't know the answer. I'm just saying that selfishness and selflessness can be instituted in different ways. And that's sort of like a high level. I can also go low level as well. But I can give you more. And I certainly do appreciate that question from was it Juliet?
Juliet Wer, yeah.
Yeah, from Juliet. Juliet, thank you for that question. And Paul, also your comment on that. But yes, there are all sorts of ways that selflessness can be defined, which is in the book. And I try to be very practical. I'll give you one more. And that is, if we don't get along, let's say you and I don't get along, Jay. All right?
Which is not true.
I just don't. That's not true, exactly. But I don't like it because you are a business owner. And you don't like me because I made a movie. And that's the prejudice. You don't like movie makers. I don't like business people. There was a study that showed if you and me gathered 3 times, that the measurements of prejudice that were up here after 3 meetings, 3 lunches, 3 coffees, 3 mid-afternoon teas, whatever it is, 3 walks, went down to here. Now, if we only just did that with the people we think that are people we don't like, Stanford did that based on racial lines, but if we did it based on geographical lines. So Juliet, there's a lot of ways of expressing what selflessness might be through action. Basically, you can see I'm describing this as different ways to express oneself to be selfless, because that is the definition. And there's so many possibilities, which are ideas like that.
Totally. I have a great friend, Philippa Hughes, who's Vietnamese American, and actually her cousin was appointed the head of ICE under Trump, but she actually went the opposite way and said, I want to understand why Trump supporters are the way they are, especially on immigration issues. And she started a series of dinners, with her, very liberal artist friends and meeting with Trump supporters so that they could just hear each other, exchange ideas, and be able to understand each other and be able to build that empathy. And I think that is a great example of selflessness, of being able to just put aside your own personal differences and just and try to just understand each other. We had another question from Juliet Ware, which I think builds on this. And she says, but doesn't selflessness mean to subjugate self for the good of another? And I think, Richard, you said earlier, there's a point in which you cross that line and you want to be careful not to cross it, right?
Right. And Juliet, thank you. It sounds like Juliet and I would have a great tea together. And that is, as I mentioned before, you don't want to go to the point of unmitigated selflessness, right? You don't want to go, it's not like 1 or 0. Nothing in life very few things in life are 1 and 0, including statements. And so, yes, you don't want to do that. There's a way to test that in the book. We have 10 questions you can determine whether you've gone too far in selflessness. But doing something selfless, as I described in action, like the meetings, is not subjugating yourself to anybody. You're just reaching out. You and I are just talking, right? We're going to hang out and find out why you don't like movie makers and why I don't like business owners.
Mm-hmm. So there's a great question from Regina Richardson that builds on this as well. My whole identity has changed being a caregiver. I am a legal guardian and caregiver for my 29-year-old former coworker, a Chinese national. How does one integrate this new identity without allowing it to become your sole identity?
Yeah. Regina, that is a good question. Because caregiving is a full-time job. And there's no card that says, hi, my name is Regina and I'm a caregiver. And when you tell people that you're a caregiver, they also think it's like, oh, so you're cooking chicken soup for them. And you're, no, this is a big time job. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're trying to do, is educate folks when it comes to the caregiving stuff, is that it is a job. It needs to be recognized. And therefore, when you are talking with either colleagues at work or supervisors or friends, that we just go, yes, we understand it. And the movie was geared towards that. Some of the sub-thematics of the book are there too. But that's the challenge. You're absolutely right. And in terms of, who else you might be able to get resource from, is that there are caregiving in some organizations, resource groups. I think one of the best things that can happen is when you talk to fellow caregivers that are in your situation. And there are so many support groups. You can certainly reach out if it's, I don't know what I don't remember what the ailment is, but if it's, you can go to AARP, you can go to Alzheimer's Association, you can go to your local groups. There's so many of them. Mm-hmm.
And I will note that James Lee says in a comment that in California, they have state in-home supportive services program, a state in-home supportive service program, IHSS, in which caregivers will be paid for caring for family members. And there's also similar programs in the state of Washington and the state of Hawaii, where you can be going through a training as a family caregiver and then actually get paid up to $100 a day, which is amazing, I think, for those states. But those are the only 3 states. And I will note also that there's some of the states with the highest populations of Asian Americans in America. But those are the only 3 states that have actually moved to address this crisis. And on a federal level, all we've done is say that we're going to study it, right? Which I think is not nearly enough. And so I think certainly more needs to be done. We have another question here from Donna Chan.
Yeah.
Richard, do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I was just saying you can tell because 2 years ago, I think we had just Hawaii.
Yeah.
And so the country is learning. We are at the beginning of a big and important conversation. So it's great to see that progress and people seeing it, but we have a long way to go. You're right. That's why when on the caregiving side, that's why we talk about that. Yeah.
So I think the statistics are that 7 out of 10 Americans will need some form of long-term care. Only 3 out of 10 Americans have saved anything towards that. And only less than 1 out of 10 Americans have saved enough. And so that's just so stark, the numbers there.
Yeah.
We had a question from Donna Chan that says, I appreciate your addressing these issues. How can we help a family member caring for elders even when the elder doesn't have dementia or memory issues?
How can you help a family member when they don't have dementia or Alzheimer's issues, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Again, I would go to you on this, to be honest, Jay. I would go back to the same answer I had before. If they're in the family, the biggest difficulty generally is planning. I can address that. Is the way you can help them is help them plan. That's the toughest, to make the tough decisions now, if you can. Mm-hmm. That's important.
Well, in a related way, Chris Liu asks, when friends say to you, how can I help? What's the best way people can support caregivers? And what I always say to answer this question is, in supporting my mother, I used to go to family help groups in Washington, D.C., because my mother was stubborn and proud, and she refused to go to these kinds of groups because she thought they were froofy, and which I think is ridiculous. And I was like, well, if you won't go, then I'm going to go. And even though I lived in a different city than my mom, I would take all of the issues she was having with my father and I would bring it to that group. And it was so invaluable to be able to do that because, for example, my father went through a phase where he was very paranoid and he would consistently accuse my mother of stealing his wallet. And I said to this group of family caregivers, which was like a sort of a group therapy session, my mother's really at her wit's end. She doesn't know how to stop him from accusing her of stealing. And this woman whose his husband had gone through Alzheimer's said, oh, my husband went through that phase. What I did was I created 12 wallets and, just full of Blockbuster cards and old business cards. And every time he accused me of stealing his wallet, I would just whip out a new one and it solved the problem. And so I told my mom this and my mother did it and it absolutely solved the problem. It was amazing. And so I just think that there's, even when you think like, you going to these groups and even though you're not the primary caregiver, there's so many ways in which you can answer these questions or help your family members from afar. Even if it's, video conferencing, we have on MemoryWell, we have interactive timelines where we send weekly questions and encourage grandchildren to engage with grandparents and ask about their family histories and build a timeline of their family histories and do weekly exercises on different moments in history so that you can help capture that history, but also engage those multi generations of families. And so I think there's ways virtually, especially in the time of COVID, that you can do this, but also ways in which you locally can find resources that can help them. I think just support them, even if it's not physically supporting them, right?
Yes, and I would say those are all great ideas. And just one other point is, or two quick points: stay overnight with your loved one that needs caregiving. Everybody looks good for a moment, for a lunch. We can all gussy up because like after this, I turned into a big marshmallow, for instance. But yes, everybody needs to stay overnight so you can hear everything, know what the bumps in the night really mean, because it really, in a caregiving environment, it's so important. Two, as Jay, you were underlining, is really listen. Really listen to the words that are being spoken by other caregivers and by the caregiving recipient. The language changes, what they're saying changes, you're changing. Before you could just say, how are you feeling, for instance, and just let it go. When you ask that caregiving recipient, how are you feeling? This is about selflessness too, by the way. When you ask somebody else how you feel, listen. Really listen.
So an anonymous attendee on that note asks, how do you prevent the emergence of bitterness after a selfless act due to ingratitude and/or unexpected suffering? Does it mostly have to do with how much you choose to give or not to give? And is it more about preparing mentally ahead of time?
I think what it is it's doing a lot of little things or small things or accessible things along the way. And those who do not appreciate the act of kindness, the selflessness, that happens and it hurts because we're human. And what I suggest in the book is that we build up a muscle set that shows we just want to do it because it's the right thing to do, and then we get better at it, basically. And sometimes when we just base it on one experience, the muscle set isn't quite toned yet. We make a conscious decision, medium conscious decision, most scientists will agree, once every 15 minutes. And so, yeah, I mean, start with maybe buying the coffee that you've seen on social media. Buy the coffee for the person behind you, or invite somebody out to lunch. Buy somebody else a lunch. Go to the next step. You know, maybe it's not actually doing something for somebody else, but maybe it's the way you treat somebody else. So another idea that we bring up in the book about selflessness is be really conscious about using names. J. Newton Small. Now, that's one extra word than most people are used to, unless you are a killer. And then you get all three names. I'm joking, but Jay, you're not that, but you know what I'm talking about. In news, we always have three names for the assailant, right? My last name, Richard Lui. Now, I appreciate you if you just say, hi, Richard. Let me make sure I get your last name right. Is that Louis? Lou? Lie? That is one expression of I am jumping outside of my discomfort of a different origin language for your name. Suthida I can't remember how to say it. Oh man, I said it my whole life. Oh, Suthida Lerpananthunsa. I'm not even sure if I got it right now because it was when I was in elementary school. But I asked her like day after day, Suthida, how do I get it right? And little did I know that it was informative. Like that's being respectful of another person and giving a little bit of yourself. Because I just goofed up, right? And I did it like 3 times. Using language that is less I think, I believe, we analyze State of the Union addresses to see which presidents used more selfish language, if you will, versus not. And there'll be some surprises and some not. I'll only give you the one wasn't surprising. Jimmy Carter used I and me the fewest number of times of any of the other addresses in recent times. So that's another way of being selfless, by reducing the focus on yourself in language. And that is communicative to other people about the way I see you.
And of course, Rosalind Carter is another caregiving champion and ambassador, his wife. Along these lines, I have a question from Miranda Molyana. Hi, I'm from Texas. Schools have been trying to raise awareness about building moral character, such as a kindness campaign, excuse me. What can we as parents do to educate and encourage selflessness, especially with young children? How do we explain that hate incidents? How do we explain hate incidents to young children that will encourage them instead of making them feel like they're a vulnerable population?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. I think experiences are really important. And depending on the age of your son or daughter, is to go out with them to do something that is selfless. I met a family called the Alvarados for the film that I'd made. And
I remember them.
Yeah. And Brian has 2 different types of cancers and can only eat through a stomach tube. He's in his late 30s, early 40s. And his daughter is Rihanna, who's on the spectrum. And they don't have a lot of money, and they don't have a lot of health, and they don't have a lot of surety in front of them. But they take Rihanna out once every week or 2 to volunteer at a food kitchen, put food bags together, and go out to Skid Row. And those little things are the beginning and the seedlings, I think, of that IQ and EQ around selflessness. To be able to listen and know and feel at the same time, be able to come up with solutions that are right on the money. So I think that is the most important, because then you have the shared experience and you can talk together of what it means to be selfless.
Well, I think we have 3 minutes left. So I'm going to ask one final question. And then I think David wants to make some closing remarks. And this one sort of really made me sad. And it says, and this is kind of a little bit selfless, but also a little bit like, well, you'll see. So from Joy Chan from San Francisco, she asks, assuming you want to minimize your family involvement for your care and self-dignity, what are you doing to plan for yourself? And that makes me sad because I could see somebody wanting to not be a burden to their family and doing that. But I also think that, that is the point of family in many ways, is to be, not to hide these things. And my father hid his cancer diagnosis from me and my mother when he first got it, and went and had a surgery with that he did not tell me about until after the fact. And I was so furious with him because it is my right as a daughter, my privilege, my expectation that I would get to be there for him for something like that. And I just was so hurt that he would exclude me. And I think that your family, Joy, might feel the same. Joyce Chan might feel the same if you try to exclude them from your potential future care. But Richard, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, when it comes to that, that's where it's not easy, right? And the family dynamic really gets tested, and there is no right answer for that. Only that, we work to build family structures and family muscle sets that we can communicate. And that's what we try to do and show. You could argue one way or the other, but that is certainly in your experience, Jay, and for the other example that was brought up, that's a tough one. Certainly. Absolutely. I agree.
Well, I encourage everybody to go out and buy Richard's book. I'm so excited for it. And thank you so much to David and everybody at the Chinese American Museum in DC.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Richard's book, Enough About Me, The Unexpected Power of Selflessness, releases on March 23rd, correct?
Yes, and you can pre-order it now if you like.
Okay, terrific. And so it's available through the usual book channels. And just add, 2 days after that, Richard will be co-hosting our museum's virtual gala. So check out our website to learn more about that. And to learn more about Jay's organization, I have a slide. MemoryWell. You could visit memorywell.com. And Jay was also kind enough to provide some helpful links based on some of the resources mentioned. But don't worry, you don't need to write this down because we're going to post this on our website and in the notes in our YouTube channel, and also all the registrants of the event will get an email that will have all these links. I think someone from AARP, I noticed in the comments, had added a link to a video that Richard, you did with AARP. And it's not on this slide, but we'll include that as well in our online links. So thank you to everyone for joining us today, and to Richard Lui and to Jay Newton Small, who I do not feel connotes, a
serial killer, murderer.
and to Penny and David Yao Museum for organizing this discussion. Much appreciated. So this event was recorded and will be posted on our website and our YouTube channel. And let's see. And really, we appreciate everyone for joining us today.
David, thank you. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you. Thanks again, guys. Sorry for the
Thanks,
dog
everybody.
barking. Bye.
Take care. Have a great day.
You too now.